Throughout the years, Minecraft has added many different blocks to the game. The question is, does having more blocks limit creativity? This is what we'll be exploring today. The game used to feel easier to build in because it naturally had limitations with the blocks available. You didn't have to think of what shade of purple to use when the only purple block in the game was purple wool. Now you have all different kinds of options to use. It can be overwhelming having so many different block choices available, but skilled builders use all different kinds of blocks to achieve what they want in their builds. I think having more options can be overwhelming, but ultimately it's up to you as the player to provide these limitations yourself rather than relying on the game to do it for you. The reason it's so important to give yourself a block palette to build with is because now you're not thinking of building with every block in the game, but rather a small collection of blocks that you've chosen to stick with. On a side note, just because Minecraft has more blocks now than it did before, doesn't mean you have to use them all. Online, this term is often referred to as block vomit, and it refers to using a lot of different kinds of blocks in a build when it doesn't make sense in the given context. Like, if you're building a simple wooden wall, you don't need 7 different kinds of blocks to texture with. People often make the mistake of thinking building with more blocks equals better building, which is not true. Back in the day, you didn't really see block vomit simply because there just were less blocks to choose from. If you wanted to make a gradient from red to blue, there weren't many options. Gradients only really started appearing after Mojang added more blocks to the game over the years, and as time passed, then there were enough blocks that you could make a satisfying gradient. You could texture and have minor color differences, whereas in older Minecraft, if you wanted to make a roof, you might use stone bricks with the occasional cobblestone to give it a little bit of texture. But other than that, people would mostly build with a solid color for a section of a build. I'm not saying that I dislike texturing or gradients. Personally, I prefer limiting the texturing in my builds. I only really texture when I think it's beneficial to the build. So if I'm building a pathway, I might use rooted dirt, mushroom, packed mud, blocks like that, to give it a little more texture, since if it's a pathway there's not much shape to it. It's pretty much flat or follows the contours of the land. But I think that when the game had less blocks, players didn't even consider texturing because there were less blocks to texture with, and so it resulted in seeing fewer and fewer builds that would have this block vomit texture effect. And so even if a build was bad, it at least looked like it made sense texturally. Like the walls didn't feel like they were randomly picked. While I'm personally not the biggest fan of using texturing and gradients in builds, I do think that it does help promote creativity, and it gives players the option to texture and use gradients in their builds, which is something that couldn't really be said when there are fewer blocks in the game. I'd suggest to stick with the block palette you've decided on beforehand and only texture when it makes sense to avoid block vomit. Minecraft's low block count forced players into limiting their block palette by having less to choose from. Players now easily get overwhelmed with all kinds of different choices available, but compare this to a drawing program. You have access to every color and every shade on the color wheel, yet this doesn't limit your creativity. I do think it helps to keep Minecraft more accessible as a whole by having a limited block palette for newer players, but since the act of choosing your blocks with careful consideration is what an artist does, and not everyone is an artist, ultimately I think that it's more beneficial to the game and to passionate players such as myself that new blocks get added regularly to keep the building scene feeling fresh and exciting. I like what Mojang is doing currently by releasing a batch of new blocks with every update or so, or at least with the new drop system every 4 or 5 updates, it gives players a chance to build with the newer blocks and get used to them and adjust their building to the new blocks that have been added. And then, after, say, a year, then Mojang will add new blocks to the game. Currently, the last time that Mojang added a new block, or rather new blocks to the game, was in the Garden Awakens update, which was released in December of 2024. That was over a year ago, but all of the blocks in that update have had enough time to be used by builders. I've certainly used pale wood in my builds, as I've used it in my ice cream store and various other parts of my beach area in my Forever World. Originally, I thought pale wood was something that I wouldn't use and I would use quartz instead, but I was completely wrong. Sure, pale wood is a white block, but its color and texture set it apart from quartz by being a slightly different shade of white, while also having a completely different texture than quartz, being more grainy. It also has fences, doors, trapdoors, and other features to keep it feeling more unique and set it apart from a similar block like quartz, or any other white block for that matter. So, to test out why I think newer blocks are more beneficial to the game, I've taken one of my builds in my Forever World, my haunted house, and I've replaced the current blocks with a separate block palette of blocks that existed much earlier. So I've replaced the warped wood planks with oak wood, I've replaced the roof with nether bricks, and the soul sand with coarse dirt. I think this really shows that the blocks in the game that existed before had a completely different feel to them. Now, I'm not saying that I did an excellent job at completely replicating my current build with older Minecraft blocks, but I do think this does show that the newer blocks can be used to achieve a completely different effect than just using the old ones. Oak wood is fine as a wood, and I think the build looks decent, but having the warped wood planks gives it more character. I wanted it to be more of a green build, and well, before, the only green blocks in the game didn't really provide any sort of similar effect. So this type of build wouldn't have been able to be done with the older blocks. Like I said, I think adding new blocks to the game is great because it gives players more options to use. You don't have to use the new blocks, but if there's a specific effect you want to achieve, then a new block might be able to help you out. I like thinking like an artist when it comes to building. I build with color theory in mind, so for the dirt, I wanted it to be darker. I didn't just use coarse dirt like I did in the replaced example. I used soul soil. I think it just fit better color-wise. And little details like that bring the build together. I think that the version that I have replaced the color palette with works, but it doesn't achieve the same effect that I wanted to go for, and it wouldn't have been possible with the older blocks. So ultimately, no, I don't think Minecraft needs many blocks, but I do think it's beneficial for the game to keep adding new blocks to the game. As I mentioned, adding more blocks can absolutely help promote creativity, provided players are able to apply their own limitations on a block palette for a given build. While less experienced builders may feel left behind by these different blocks, I do think that the benefits outweigh the drawbacks when it comes to adding new blocks to the game. But what do you think? Should Minecraft add more blocks to the game, or should they slow it down? With all that being said, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Goodbye.